So Micaela Karlsen, the author of A Plant-Based Life, you can look for that this summer, contributed to the New York Times best-selling book, Forks Over Knives, The Plant-Based Way to Health. And she is an expert in gluten-free, which seems to be a very hot topic. We've had questions about gluten-free earlier today. So please help me welcome Micaela Karlsen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I also wanted to thank Dr. K and all the organizers of this event. This is great. I'm really impressed by all the people coming and really thinking about their health today, and it's great that you're here. So I wanted to talk about this today. I know this is a sort of a topic that a lot of people have a lot of questions about, and just to give a little bit of background on myself, I'm currently engaged in doctoral research training. I have a master's degree in human nutrition. And I understand, too, that a lot of the public is very confused about nutrition, but a lot of people find that they think they may feel better eating gluten-free. And I'm also a person that has experimented with my own diet a lot in order to try and feel my best. So I kind of am coming from a research direction, but also I have a lot of empathy and kind of personal experience with just personal experimentation and trying to figure out what will work for me. And it's always such a pleasure to be able to talk to a more informed audience and kind of help clear up some of the confusion that's out there because there are so many questions. So I hope as we're going through this, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll be happy to take questions afterwards as well. So just to talk about what we're going to cover today, a lot of people are kind of getting excited about gluten-free diets, and maybe some of you here eat a gluten-free diet already. And I want to kind of talk about what the definitions are of gluten and the different issues that people have with gluten and why you might want to avoid it, and then some strategies at the end for how you can eat gluten-free, healthfully, but without going crazy and making it a sustainable lifestyle. I'm really focused on behavior change and adherence in my research direction, and that's what the focus of the book I have coming out this summer is. Because it's very important for people not just to know why they might want to make a change for the better, but how they can do it and how they can maintain it and make it a lifestyle that they can stick with. So how many of you have seen this commercial, or you may have? Yes. So a lot of people now are starting to get more interested in gluten-free foods, and I think this commercial kind of exemplifies this rising interest that there is on the part of the public. So Cheerios are, I think people think of them as sort of a symbol of childhood, and now that they're officially gluten-free, a lot more children can have a real childhood. And it's a cute commercial, but kind of shows how many new products there are in the marketplace, which we'll get to soon. And if you just do a Google search for gluten-free foods, you get a bazillion different hits that come up, and you're probably seeing a lot of them now in regular supermarkets as well as on the internet or specialty health food stores or other places. So these are starting to replace some of the gluten-containing standards that people have, and that can be both good and bad depending on what the nutrient composition of your diet's like. But we'll get to that soon. And then I think this is another great example of how people are just more interested in this topic. So I don't know if has anyone ever used Google Trends to look at search activity? So it's free, anyone can use it, you just type in Google Trends, and it shows you the relative search activity of different search terms. So here, exercise is the highest, and that's the standard, and unsurprisingly, as you can see, every January, search activity for exercise peaks. But as you can also see, since the beginning of tracking this data, 2005, 2007, searches for gluten-free have really gone up. So more and more people are looking for it. It shows that they're interested, and it may be because they know they need to, or they're just wondering if maybe they need to eat a gluten-free diet themselves. So how many people in the audience try to include gluten-free foods? And how many of you exclusively eat a gluten-free diet? So maybe some people here. Yeah, and so you're not alone. So about 17% of whites and a third of non-whites actually make a decision to include gluten-free food in their diet. And the sales have really gone up. So this statistic is from 2012 to 14. sales went up by 63%. That's a huge increase in that market, but that's a much bigger increase than the number of people who are actually diagnosed with celiac disease. So there's a lot of interest, and there's some confusion wrapped into that interest, but there are also a lot of people who are finding that they do feel better eating this way, and so that's something to pay attention to. Okay, so we know that there's interest, people are curious, a lot of you are involved and interested, and want to get to these questions and see what we can answer. So first of all, what is gluten? It's the protein that is found in whole grains, cereal grains, including the wheat family, of which there are a number of varieties, including durum, emmer, spelt is also related to wheat, farro, farina, kamut, corazin wheat, and then also in barley, rye, and triticale, which is less common but still a gluten-containing grain. So cereal grains are actually the seeds of grasses, and it's just one seed per plant, and that's the definition of a cereal grain. But there are three sort of different conditions that people may have that may cause them to either benefit from avoiding gluten or wheat or require that they do so. And the first and most severe of these is celiac disease. And this is a genetic autoimmune condition that causes a reaction in the small intestine when gluten is consumed, where the body attacks the villi and the microvilli. I'll get to sort of a diagram of that on the next slide, in response to eating gluten. And about, I think 95% of people with celiac disease carry one particular genetic mutation, and 5% have another. Not everybody who has these particular genes develops the disease, so there's probably some environmental triggers also that are also implicated. But it is really a genetic disease, and it's very serious. It can lead to gastrointestinal symptoms, bloating, diarrhea, and headache and fatigue, and also nutrient deficiencies in the longer term, and even worse problems. So most people, this is now becoming more known about, and more people are being diagnosed, but there are many people who have this condition that are not diagnosed, and the fact that there's so much rising interest now in gluten-free eating, I think, is helping those people identify their issue and knowing that they need to avoid all gluten. Now, there's also this other group of people who have something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And this is not an autoimmune condition, and it's not an allergy, in that there's no diagnostic test for it, but it produces the same symptoms that celiac produces. So these people are finding they have abdominal cramps, bloating, discomfort, diarrhea, maybe fatigue, and they happen following gluten ingestion, but if you do a blood test, you don't find the antibodies that you find with celiac, and there's no real diagnostic test for it, except if you avoid gluten, the symptoms go away, and then you reintroduce it, and you find that they come back. That's how you would diagnose this condition. But this is kind of a gray area, and I think this may be what is going to be an emerging topic for research in the coming years as people get more interested in this. And then third, there's just a straight up wheat allergy. So a wheat allergy, again, it's not an autoimmune condition, but it does instigate an immune response. So you have an antibody that's produced in response to eating wheat, but it doesn't then cause an attack on your own body's cells. And this is a smaller percentage of people compared to the celiac and the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but still important. And for the people that have a wheat allergy, they may be able to tolerate other gluten-containing grains, but just not wheat or the wheat family. So it's not as serious, but can still cause fatigue, a lot of times respiratory problems, and different kinds of reactions that are shared with other food allergies, and it can happen very quickly after eating the food. So if you do have celiac, or you know someone that does, or you're thinking about maybe getting yourself tested, to explain what happens, the sort of fingers that you see on the left-hand side are the villi, and then they're covered in microvilli in the small intestine, and these are folds of skin that basically increase the surface area of the small intestine so that you're able to have more surface area and you can absorb nutrients more effectively. What happens when you have celiac disease is you're eating the gluten, these antibodies are produced, and they actually attack those fingers, and the surface area really diminishes. It causes problems absorbing nutrients, and because of this autoimmune attack, you also can end up with holes in the lining of the intestine, and this can lead to a leaky gut situation and other problems, and inflammation is a very common result of this. So it's very serious. There is no cure or treatment aside from avoiding gluten, absolutely. And if this continues and someone's undiagnosed and they are having this problem, it can lead to permanent damage of the villi and eventually more severe problems in the long term, including cancer. So this is what's going on with celiac, and if you do suspect that you may have it, it is really important to seek out some help from your doctor and get tested. But a question I think that's very interesting to ask is how many people are actually sensitive or have a problem who suspect that they are. So this is a very interesting study. They recruited people who were self-perceived to have a problem with gluten. So they thought that they had celiac, or they felt they were allergic, they felt they had some symptoms, and they screened them first for celiac with the blood test for the antibodies and wheat allergy for the antibody that's produced in response to wheat. And they found about 6.6% of these people had celiac and 0.5% had wheat allergy. And then of the remaining people where they couldn't diagnose anything from the blood test, they put them on a gluten-free diet for 6 months, and then they put them on a gluten-containing diet for 1 month after that. So they had a period of avoidance, and then they reintroduced the food. And after that, about 6.9% did have the symptoms following the reintroduction of eating gluten, but that means that 86% of them really had no measurable effect from eating gluten again. So, this is really interesting because I think maybe it kind of speaks to the fact that maybe not as many people who feel that they have a problem with gluten actually do. There could be other factors that are going on here that we'll talk about, but a lot of times what comes along with eating gluten-free is some improvements in health overall, so that's not a bad thing. But for many people, they may actually be fine eating gluten, and it's sort of interesting to think about how we can make sense of this. So one thing to remember is that the symptoms may be related to dose and frequency. So for some people, if they avoid a food that they're sensitive to or allergic to, and then they eat it in small amounts or less frequently, they seem to be able to handle it. And that could have been happening in that study. We don't know. It could be that for some of those people, 1 month after 6 months off of gluten was not enough to trigger the reaction. But if they kept eating it, perhaps their symptoms would have come back. It's really hard to say. So we don't know everything about how the human body works, and that's why I think that study was so interesting, and I'd love to see it repeated with other populations and maybe for a longer period of time. But at the same time, 86% of people really had no discernible symptoms from reintroducing gluten. So that's a lot. That's interesting. But the thing is, if they're avoiding gluten by avoiding flour products and therefore less processed food and less refined carbohydrates, that can really lead to an increase in the quality of your diet. And these kinds of refined foods and processed carbs, these are foods that a lot of people report as making them feel tired anyway, or causing diarrhea or digestive problems anyway sometimes. And so it can be that a gluten-free way of eating can really overlap with an overall healthier way of eating. And so for some people who maybe aren't truly a celiac patient, or they don't actually have a wheat allergy, and they may or may not have this non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it could be that when they improve their diet, they cut out the flours and refined carbs, they feel better, and that's a good thing. It may or may not directly be related to the gluten. But it's interesting to think about, and that's where people who are very attentive to how they're feeling after they eat can really get a lot of information, and do some elimination diets, test yourself out, and see what you can observe after you eat different foods. So then question, like my answer is, should everyone avoid gluten? I would say, well, everyone should avoid processed food. It doesn't matter if you're gluten-free or you think you need to be or you don't, but gluten ingestion is automatically going to slow down, and so a lot of other things that are also in a lot of products that people buy. So that includes animal protein, cholesterol, total and saturated fat, salt and sugar, and preservatives, and all of these in different ways have been linked to chronic disease. Animal protein's been linked to both cancer and heart disease. Cholesterol, of course, is strongly linked to heart disease. Total and saturated fat, again, heart disease. It's been demonstrated in many ways. Salt is a problem for hypertension if you're salt sensitive or you've had heart disease and hypertension in the past. Sugar, of course, isn't good for diabetics. It's also related to central adiposity or body fat in the center of the body. And then preservatives, the science is less clear there, but personally, I don't want to be eating chemicals that I don't have to. So the more that we can avoid all these processed foods, the more we can naturally eliminate a lot of these things that aren't so great. And then the benefits are lower risk for chronic disease, easier time losing weight and or maintaining a weight, and grocery savings if we shift by avoiding gluten towards a more whole food plant-based diet. And plant-based nutrition is more my focus, but I think that overlaps a lot with gluten-free eating because it's really a healthy way to eat when you focus on whole grains and when you replace these processed foods with unrefined foods in their natural state. And there's a lot of research on the benefits of this way of eating, and it can be very delicious, as a lot of the chefs here in our demonstration earlier, I think, showed. So just to sort of remind you, if you're avoiding gluten and processed things, then it's like if someone quits smoking and they suddenly have $10 or $20 extra per week. There are all these foods that you can just not spend money on anymore, including fast foods, the baked goods, frozen meals, value-added meals, all these kinds of crackers and things. And that can be really nice because it frees you up to have a bigger budget for other parts of your grocery plan. But if you are planning on avoiding gluten, it's a little bit more complicated than just avoiding wheat. And so you have to be really attentive to reading labels. So if you have a diagnosis or you suspect that you really have some symptoms following gluten, you need to look for wheat, rye, and barley. And so wheat, it's the most obvious and the most common. It's in bread, baked goods, salad dressings, most flour-containing products. But yeah, including salad dressing, you want to be careful. Rye bread, rye beer, cereal, and then barley is in malt and barley malt, as well as beer and food coloring, and also soups, and then malt vinegar are the big ones. But there are a lot of resources on the internet, so if you are needing to kind of train yourself to read labels, there are a lot of good websites that you can Google and get some more information about that. But you kind of have to be, very attentive to that. And in addition, in lots of rice-based cuisines like Thai food, Chinese food, they can be great for gluten-free eating. But soy sauce does contain gluten, and so you have to be careful about that if you're eating out in a Chinese restaurant. And you just have to be, very attentive. So overall, it's a lot easier if you're eating at home and cooking for yourself because you know what's in the food and you know what you bought. And of course, that's going to be less refined and more unprocessed anyway. So there's many benefits to that. So then when you're thinking about what to eat instead, now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of products now on the market for gluten-free replacements, but what's really best is to focus on the whole grains. And the seeds or the pseudograins, and the pseudograins refers to, we consider them whole grains, but they're seeds that are released not just one at a time, but many at a time from plants other than grasses. So that's the botanical definition. But that includes oats, sorghum, millet, teff, amaranth, buckwheat groats, wild rice, Job's tears, also known as hato mugi if you shop in Asian markets, quinoa and its relative kanwa, brown rice, corn, and there's, as we've talked about, a variety of gluten-free products out there. However, not all of these are as familiar to people as some. Oats are naturally gluten-free, and if you want to make sure that what you're eating is not contaminated with anything, you need to look for a label that says certified gluten-free oats. However, a lot of the oats that are sold now are processed in factories that also process wheat and other gluten-containing grains. So that's why they may not be gluten-free, even though oats on their own don't contain gluten. So for someone with celiac, it would be very important to only get products that say gluten-free certified. If someone just has a wheat allergy, or they maybe have these symptoms following the ingestion of gluten, the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, they may be able to eat oats from any source. That's something they would have to experiment with. But there are a lot of great recipes online for almost all of these, and if you can't find them in your supermarket, and you probably will be able to find a number of them in the international food aisle or in a health food store, you can also find them on Amazon. And ordering food on Amazon is great. It's really convenient, and it can actually save you money. This is a great website that I found some of these, they have purchasing links there. It's healwithfood.org list by gluten-free grains. So you can Google that, and there are a lot of great sources for purchasing, so you can keep your cupboard stocked. So these kinds of things you can put in grain-based salads. You can make burgers out of them, mixed with beans, and bake them. You can make a whole variety of breakfast cereal, porridges. Buckwheat is really delicious with apple and cinnamon, and as kind of an oatmeal substitute in the morning. And a lot of the baking that you do, gluten-free baking is harder because the gluten is a binder in the baked goods, so you do end up with a different texture, and it can be heavier. But there are a lot of options, and there are some additives that you can use, like arrowroot powder can be a binder to help your baking stick together better. And there's a lot of resources that you can look up, and a lot of great videos online too that will help people who are getting into the swing of it to try different things and have some special techniques for making things turn out right. So as I've been saying, there are some pitfalls of gluten-free eating, and if you're going to, instead of these whole grains, if you're just replacing your old food with the gluten-free versions, that's not necessarily going to be any healthier. And there are a lot of, added fats, added salt, added sugar that you can find in processed foods. And often gluten-free products actually use the fat instead of the gluten as a binder. So many times they are higher in fat than the regular version. And there are still flour products. And, when you're adding these preservatives and salt and all these ingredients that at home you would probably have less of or none at all, these are the things that people can report giving them fatigue. So in addition, there may be a lot of eggs and dairy also used as binders, which can increase your saturated fat and your animal protein, your cholesterol intake. So it's really important to be able to eat a diet that makes you feel like you're not deprived, because that's not sustainable. But at the same time, you want to try to shift your taste palette towards more healthy, whole grain and unrefined choices. And the longer that you eat that way, the more your tastes do shift and the more enjoyable your food becomes. So if you are choosing to eat gluten-free, whether for a diagnosis or you suspect you have a problem or you have an allergy, just avoid the processed foods, emphasize whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, and make beautiful salads. There are a lot of social media sources that you can subscribe to for healthy recipes, and I really recommend that because it gives you a lot of new input every day, and it can help keep your momentum up and also inspire you. And everyone seems to love posting pictures of food on Facebook. I also recommend that you do that yourself, because you get all this positive reinforcement from your friends, and there are lots of people that will say, like, oh, I wish you could be my personal chef. Do you want to come over? And it's just very reinforcing and kind of affirming about your choices. So, again, the portrait of a healthy gluten-free diet should really be the whole grains, and there are plenty of things to try. And I have a couple examples, too, from my book that's coming out in July, and I think you can sign up and pre-order it at the bookseller here, and I'll be there afterwards signing stickers that they'll insert. But this is one of my favorite meals. It's totally gluten-free. It actually doesn't have any grains at all. But this is a salad I learned to make when I lived in France. This is a plant-based version of the salad niçoise. and mustard vinaigrette that we made this morning for those of you who are there. So this is delicious. And then treats are still possible. Again, I try not to focus on flour too much, but I do have a recipe for gingerbread that I typically make with spelt flour, but you can swap out buckwheat and it works very well. And buckwheat is kind of a stronger flavor, so I don't like it in everything, but it works very well in gingerbread because of the molasses and the cinnamon and the ginger, and it's just great. So, life is not over if you are thinking about embarking on this diet. There are a lot of great choices out there. Again, simple foods, not just healthy, but they're also affordable. So all these things like the whole grains, beans, vegetables, fruits, and skipping all the processed food, it can really save you a lot of money. And I think that's a nice side benefit of choosing a more whole, simple diet. So I have some great examples of resources that you can check out. Trader Joe's has this nice article on dinner suggestions. They have recipes. I think these are all gluten-free, or most of them are, rice and quinoa and sweet potato-based dinners, and it's $30 a week per person. Many of us are looking at different kinds of budgets for ourselves and our families, and whether you would modify this for more people or you may be living alone and this would work for you, it's really great to get inspiration from articles like this. And then I thought it's cool to do a comparison of what can you get for your money comparing the cheapest of the cheap, the bottom of the barrel of McDonald's, with just whole food plant-based meals that are gluten-free. You can make them at home. And this is nice because, a lot of people are on a tight timeline, a tight budget, and they're trying to fit a lot of things into their day. But if you can save some money consistently over the long term, that can free up your resources to do other things that are important to you. And I feel like this is also good to think about because I love nutrition and eating, but it's not that I guess I want that to be supportive of everyone pursuing the life that they want and expressing who they are in the world. So the more that your food can really do that for you and help you be effective and vibrant and awake and alive, the better. And then, you don't have to think about food all the time. But so anyway, here's some options. So you can either go to McDonald's, and there's two different dinners for 4 people that you could buy, and one's like the Chicken McNugget version, one is the Big Mac Happy Meal version. They're both a little over $20, $21. They're full of cholesterol, so much salt, so much saturated fat, but people think of this as a pretty cheap way to feed a family of 4 people. And then you could contrast that with just cooking at home, gluten-free, plant-based, and pretty healthy. And actually my collaborator, Kathy Pollard, and I, who contributed a lot of the recipes to my book, she and I were looking at these price comparisons, and we decided to make these meals based on ingredients that people could buy at Walmart, because a lot of people in different parts of the country have different access to healthy food and vegetables and fruits, and it's actually a great thing that Walmart is starting to have grocery stores in it, because for a lot of people that live in isolated areas, they can then have access to some more choices. So there's spicy black beans, rice, and salad dinner, and it's only just under $18. And then portobello steaks, sweet potatoes, and salad, and it's a little bit over $18. So the price comparison is very comparable, and it's really empowering to see how much you can save over the long term. But the truth is, a lot of people are spending more money than McDonald's prices on dinner. They're buying meat and dairy, which are expensive. They're maybe buying prepared foods and processed foods and mixing these things in, and it can all add up. So it really is affordable to eat healthfully. It just requires shifting your planning and your purchasing patterns a little bit, and then as you get into the swing of it, it becomes much easier and kind of automatic. So I'm just going to cover the 3 main strategies for making this work. And Mark is passing around a sign-up sheet. If you'd like to sign up for my email list, I sometimes send out recipes or tips on healthy living, and would be happy to add you if you're interested in that. So number 1, you have to shape your environment for success. 2, do not rely on willpower to carry you through on your food decisions. And 3, keep your social network strong and supportive. These three elements are really the key, the core changes, I think, or core focuses that people need to make if they want to be successful with any kind of healthy dietary change in the long run. So first, you want to think about how does your environment support your goals? And that means looking at what is in your house. Are these foods consistent with your intentions? Are there choices there for you to have whenever you're hungry, because you shouldn't be letting yourself get really hungry? Do you have food at work? Do your office mates have options? Can they be accommodating? Do you have people at work that, and I think a lot of people face this, they have people bringing in all these brownies and leftover cakes, and then they leave them in the workroom, and I mean, what are you supposed to do? It's like the food is menacing you and you have to get away from it. So a lot of times people are doing this because they want to get the food out of their own house. And so they may be open to a conversation that you have, and if you want to say, I'm having a lot of trouble sticking with my intentions about what I want to eat, I want to feel healthier, could we come up with a plan where we put this food somewhere else so it's not like right outside my office door? And that can really work if you're authentic and you're really asking them for help in supporting you to be healthy. A lot of people respond to that very well. As long as you're not trying to control them or telling them what they should eat or not eat. If you ask for help, people do want to help you. And look for possible restaurants and delis where you will feel comfortable with the menu. You can think about where do you drive on your way home from work, and what sorts of snacks do you end up picking up? Are those consistent with your intentions? Can you think about pre-planning that a little bit and making some decisions beforehand so that if you're challenged by feeling really hungry and you don't have anything in the car, you've already decided where you're going to go, what you're going to buy, and you don't have to make that decision when you're in the middle of feeling starving. So really try to think about your environment as a whole, not just your home and your kitchen, but everywhere that you physically are in your life, and make sure there's food there. If there isn't, how can you get food there so it's there for you when you need it? And think about really how you can just shift your environment to more support your goals so that you're not making a decision when you go to eat something, you're just eating something you've already decided will work for you. Now, number 2, don't rely on willpower. This is a fascinating book. I recommend everyone reading this book. This is from a researcher at the University of Florida. He's a social psychologist called Roy Baumeister, and he's done a lot of work on willpower over the world, or over his career. And he has determined that willpower probably does not exist to help ourselves not eat too much or stop ourselves from eating something we don't want to eat. Humans evolved to eat as much as we can, the most calorie-dense foods, till we're full, and as often as possible. We grew up, our species grew up and evolved in an environment of scarcity. We were hunters and gatherers to some degree, probably more gatherers, but we did not have the excess of the modern food environment that we're now navigating. So it was in our interest to eat as much as we could at every opportunity. And so now we're using willpower, which really probably evolved to help us navigate social tensions so that when we lived in these small groups and depended on each other for survival in a very real sense, we are able to let things roll off our back and get along with people. We're now using that behavior, willpower, to stop ourselves from eating or stop ourselves from eating too much. And it's very taxing on that resource because willpower does get diminished when you use it up in the short term, and you need to rest and replete by eating in order to get your willpower back up to a level where it can actually function. So if you are on any kind of diet, or initially when you make a switch towards a healthier diet and you're trying to make choices that you can stick with, it's going to be challenging if you get hungry or tired and you need to make a decision in that moment. So the key here is don't let yourself get starving. That's why I'm saying you should have food around all the time and make your environment really supportive. And if you do find that you're having cravings or feeling impulsive in a particular moment, try to eat something healthy, something like a piece of fruit, get your blood sugar back up, and then just try to wait if you can. But don't expect that any kind of long-term dietary change, gluten-free, less fat, anything that you're choosing to do for yourself is going to be easy if you rely on your willpower or your personality to make it stick. You have to create a lifestyle and a rhythm to your cooking and your eating and your environment so that it feels very affirming and you're not being deprived, because deprivation is it's just not going to last. It's just the road to failure, really. And then finally, the social support. So again, I think it's fantastic to take advantage of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to post pictures, and you can follow chefs that you like, whose recipes you enjoy. There's a ton of great resources. And the more pictures you post of your food, the more positive comments you're going to get. People just love looking at dinners on Facebook. It is like their favorite thing, and it can really be affirming when you're on this path of health. And you may also find that some of your friends and family actually are more interested in health and diet and nutrition than you realized, and maybe you have other people eating gluten-free that you didn't know were doing so, and you can connect with them, and then maybe you want to have dinner together, have a potluck. There are also cooking classes you can sign up for, so I encourage you to reach out and try to make new friends in your area, in your community, or invite people for a themed potluck, and really have some new activity, and so you're not just doing it by yourself, because isolation is really not sustainable. And then there's always the question of people that you live with who may not want to eat this way or may not be ready to make a shift. For many people who have a diagnosis of celiac, that is enough that their entire household needs to be completely gluten-free because it's a very serious medical condition. And often those families have a much easier time sticking with the diet, because if there is cross-contamination, that can be very serious and instigate that autoimmune response. For someone that has a wheat allergy or is gluten sensitive, they may not have as much ammunition to convince their spouse or their family members to switch to totally gluten-free in the house. However, again, I think if you have an authentic conversation and ask for their help, and maybe ask for some compromise so that in the house only certain foods are in the kitchen and the refrigerator, and of course you're not trying to control what they eat when they're outside of the house. A lot of people really want to support you, and when they don't feel controlled, they want to move towards that goal together. So soliciting help, these conversations ongoing, I think are really important, because you don't want to feel like suddenly you're eating a new way, and that makes it impossible to connect with the people that you love. So I do have some resources for learning more. I have a website, plantbasedresearch.org, that is a library of peer-reviewed research papers relevant to plant-based nutrition. And these are some of my other favorite websites. Straightupfood.com is super healthy. Everything's gluten-free. Beautiful pictures. That's Kathy Fisher. She's out in California. And forksovernKnives.com has a ton of recipes. They also have a meal planner and an app, which is very nice. Dr. McDougall and Nutrition Facts are great for medical articles and more research information. Medical treatment, there is a residential medical facility in California called True North Health Center, and they work with a lot of people who have different autoimmune conditions and conditions of inflammation, as well as heart disease and diabetes, and they're amazing. And they work with a lot of patients that have had trouble, and all the food there is gluten-free. They have a extremely anti-allergenic diet, I guess you would call it. And then online courses in nutrition, nutritionstudies.org. So that's the cover of my book. It's coming out in July. If you're interested, I think, as I said, you can pre-order it here. And my website, if you would like to email me with any questions, please feel free to do so through the website. And thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Micaela. We have a question right here.
Can you email this PowerPoint to our email address? It's only because it has all of those
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Okay,
if you just
great.
Send me an email through the contact form, and I'm happy to. Yep.
And you'll be outside afterwards,
definitely.
because you are a contributor to one book that's out now.
Yes, absolutely.
And you'll be signing that.
The Forks Over Knives book that's out there, yep.
Great. Do we have any more questions for Micaela? Anybody? Oh, we've got a question here.
Hi. Have you ever found that people are gluten sensitive ever get, like, an allergy can change over time?
Yeah.
Do you ever find that with gluten sensitivity?
Well, I think that, I couldn't speak for everyone, and from a research perspective, I'm not sure if there's enough research to make global statements about it, but I found for myself, I think I'm one of the people that as long as I don't eat too much, I seem to be able to eat a little bit of it. And so, as you said with other allergies, they can evolve and change over time, and sometimes people who avoid a food for a long time can end up eating it later. So I think that can change. There's so many different factors that may play a role in immune response, like stress, exercise, what else are you eating at the time, how many epigenetic kinds of influences, meaning how does the environment influence your gene expression. There's so many things that I couldn't really begin to guess about what's happening or why, but yes, I do think that it's possible. Not with celiac, but with a wheat allergy or maybe the gluten sensitivity. Yeah.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much, Micaela Karlsen. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Hope you learned a lot.